My dad actually laughed at me today, I muttered under my breath, trying to ignore the burning embarrassment. But it wasn't just a laugh, it was the kind of cruel, deliberate mockery that left a scar you couldn't see. And it happened at my sister's wedding, no less, in front of hundreds of guests, with the chandeliers casting every harsh shadow perfectly over my face. I'm Riley, the one who always tried to blend into the background, the quiet kid, who never caused trouble. My dad, Harold, was the kind of man who demanded perfection, perfect grades, perfect manners, perfect appearance, and if you failed, he'd make sure everyone knew. Today, I had failed. My tie was slightly crooked, my hair off by a centimeter, and apparently, that was enough for him to laugh while sipping his red wine. Then the moment came that changed the tone of the entire evening. One of the groomsmen, a tall, polished man with military bearing, noticed Harold's smirk and raised his glass in a crisp, respectful salute. The room seemed to freeze. My dad's smug expression faltered. His eyes widened. And then, to everyone's horror, he spat out his wine in mid-swallow, the deep red staining his designer shirt. Gasps filled the air, whispers ricocheting off marble walls. It wasn't just about the humiliation. It was about the audacity of someone else commanding respect while he tried to assert dominance. And the worst part? My dad's anger simmered beneath the surface. I could see it in the twitch of his jaw, the tightening of his fingers around the wine glass. That was the Harold I knew all too well, the man who refused to let anyone overshadow him, especially someone daring to show him up in public. I glanced around at my family. My sister was laughing politely, oblivious to the tension brewing beneath the smiles. Mom looked uncomfortable, adjusting her pearl necklace, as if it could shield her from the awkwardness. And me. I was caught between shock, shame, and a flicker of something darker, a feeling that this wasn't over, that there was more to come. The groomsman, meanwhile, returned to his place, calm and unbothered, yet the subtle defiance lingered like a challenge. I realized then that weddings, for some people, aren't just about love, they are stages for power, for hierarchy, for settling old scores without anyone realizing it. As I sipped my water, trying to regain composure, a quiet unease settled in my chest. This wasn't just about a crooked tie or spilled wine. Harold's humiliation was a signal. If he could be shaken like that in front of everyone, what lengths would he go to reclaim his control? And more importantly, how far would I have to go to make sure I wasn't his next target? The night glittered with celebration, but behind the laughter and clinking glasses, I knew a storm was quietly brewing. And when it hit, it wouldn't be gentle. The day after the wedding, the lingering tension from the night before didn't vanish, it followed me like a shadow. I tried to shake it off, but small, subtle signs started stacking up, pieces of a puzzle that didn't yet make sense. First, there were the calls. My dad's phone seemed to buzz constantly, always slipping into another room whenever it rang. Quick glances caught him smirking into the receiver, his tone sharp and clipped, yet conspiratorial, as if he were sharing secrets with someone he didn't want me to know. The secrecy felt deliberate, and every time I asked innocuous questions, he'd flash that practiced smile and say, "Nothing for you to worry about, Riley." But I knew him too well. That wasn't a reassurance. That was a warning. Then there was the money. For years, I had noticed my sister receiving perks I never did, designer clothes, spontaneous trips, lavish gifts. At the wedding, it was even more obvious. My sister's table was a glittering island of opulence, while ours, though respectable, seemed intentionally restrained. Mom smiled politely, but I could see the way her eyes darted nervously between Harold and me. The uneven treatment stung, but it also hinted at a deeper pattern of favoritism that had been brewing quietly for years. Even my friends noticed it. During the after-party, someone whispered, "Does your dad always treat you like this?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. I laughed it off, but inside, I felt cornered, scrutinized not just by my family, but by the social expectations they wielded like weapons. At home, the tension grew. Harold would comment on my posture, my wardrobe, even the way I answered texts, always with a hint of disdain. Meanwhile, he lavished praise on my sister for the slightest accomplishment, no matter how trivial. Every compliment directed at her felt like a jab aimed at me. It wasn't overt cruelty, at least, not always, but it was insidious, subtle, and deeply demoralizing. The emotional toll was becoming harder to ignore. I found myself double-checking every interaction, wondering if he was testing me, if someone I trusted could be feeding him information, manipulating the narrative behind the scenes. The unease from the wedding hadn't been a one-time flare. It was the opening salvo of something bigger, something I couldn't yet see. Late that night, I sat in my room, replaying the moment when he spat the wine. At first, I had felt embarrassed, but now, a darker thought took root. That public humiliation of himself. It wasn't accidental. It was a warning, a way to reassert dominance, to remind everyone, including me, who controlled the family narrative. And as I stared at the ceiling, I realized, if the signals I was reading were true, the betrayal was already in motion. I just hadn't uncovered it fully yet. But I would. And when I did, everything would change. Something in my chest tightened, a mixture of anxiety and determination. The red flags were clear. Now it was only a matter of time, before the truth revealed itself. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't wanted to believe it, had tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting. But the truth couldn't be ignored any longer. I was going through the wedding bills, trying to make sense of the staggering amounts, wondering how my parents had justified such extravagant spending, and that's when I found it. A set of transfers from Dad's accounts to my sister's name. Hundreds of thousands. Not gifts. Not loans. Direct deposits, timed meticulously over the past year, labeled under trust fund allocation and estate planning. My eyes widened. My hands trembled. Every number, every transaction, every notation screamed betrayal. Harold wasn't just favoring my sister, he was redirecting inheritance, controlling assets that were meant for both of us, subtly ensuring I had no claim, no power, no voice. The same man who had mocked me at the wedding, who spat his wine in embarrassment, had spent years plotting this. I felt the room spin. My sister, had she known? Or was she as blind to it as I had been? I searched her face in my mind, replaying every smile, every hug, every compliment she received while I was quietly sidelined. It all felt like a cruel theater I'd been forced to watch from the wings. Rage bubbled under my skin, sharp and unrelenting. Not just at Dad, but at the injustice of it all. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult or public humiliation. It was premeditated, legalistic, calculated. He had weaponized our family bond against me, wrapped greed in paternal authority, and executed it flawlessly. I slammed the ledger closed, my chair tipping slightly in my anger. My heart raced, and my mind swirled with disbelief. How could the man who had raised me, who had sworn to protect me, turn into a predator within his own home? I thought of every Christmas, every birthday, every dinner where smiles hid manipulation, and it all clicked into a sickening pattern. The worst part? The wedding. That night had been the culmination of his plan, not just the wine-spitting embarrassment, but a demonstration of control. He had mocked me to reassert dominance in front of everyone, to remind me of my place. The groomsman's salute had merely triggered Harold's ego, exposing his fragile self-image. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my shaking hands. Pain and anger coiled together like a living thing inside me. But beneath it all, a spark of determination flickered. He had assumed I would remain passive, that I would watch silently as he rewrote the rules of our family for his favorite child. Not anymore. I could feel the shift, the simmering energy that had been quiet for so long now demanding release. I wouldn't confront him blindly. I wouldn't scream or collapse in despair. But I would act. And when I did, the betrayal that had cost me so much would become his undoing. I leaned back in my chair, jaw tight, eyes cold. Every plan, every piece of evidence, every subtle manipulation Dad had used would be accounted for. The game had begun, and this time, I would be the one holding all the cards, the weight of betrayal pressed down on me like a physical force. For days, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, replaying every wedding moment in my mind. Dad's laughter, his smug smirk, the groomsman's salute, it all blended into a bitter montage of humiliation and deceit. I felt cornered, trapped by the very people who were supposed to protect me. But one night, as I stared at the family ledger spread across the dining table, something shifted. The numbers weren't just evidence, they were power. Every transaction, every misallocation of funds, every subtle favor my sister had received was proof. Not just proof of wrongdoing, but proof of vulnerability. Harold had assumed I would crumble, that I would accept my supposed place quietly. Anger sparked into clarity. I realized the betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Dad had played me, thinking I'd remain passive, letting him elevate my sister while undermining me. And yet, in doing so, he'd left a trail I could follow. He thought he controlled the board, but every move he made was a clue to his arrogance. I remembered the groomsman's salute, the quiet dignity that had made Dad spit his wine in shock. That moment replayed in my mind, and a thought hit me with the force of lightning: power could be exposed in plain sight. Just as the groomsman's composure unmasked Dad's fragile ego in front of everyone, I could orchestrate a reckoning that would leave no room for denial. For the first time since the wedding, a calm determination replaced the storm of hurt. I was no longer just a victim, I was a strategist. Every late-night discussion, every whispered secret, every ledge of evidence could be used to my advantage. I could turn humiliation into leverage, favoritism into proof, and deceit into exposure. I stood, pacing the room. The transformation wasn't instant, it was quiet, subtle, but unstoppable. The helplessness that had weighed on me was replaced with focus. I would not act recklessly. I would not be driven purely by anger. I would plan, execute, and reclaim what was rightfully mine. Dad had underestimated me. He had assumed I lacked the will to fight. That assumption would become his downfall. By dawn, I felt something I hadn't in years: control. I was no longer reacting. I was strategizing. Every small piece of evidence, every social interaction, every family habit would become a weapon in the right hands. I sat at my desk, mind clear and resolute. This wasn't just about money or property, it was about justice, dignity, and exposing the true face of someone I had once called father. And in that moment, I promised myself, the next time the world laughed at my humiliation, it would be my laughter they would hear first. I didn't confront him. That was the hardest part, sitting across from Dad at Sunday dinners, listening to him talk about family unity, while knowing exactly how deeply he'd betrayed me. He still believed I was broken, embarrassed, safely beneath his thumb. That illusion became my greatest advantage. Step 1 was evidence. Not emotions. Not accusations. Facts. I started quietly. Late nights, logged into old family email archives I still had access to. Years of correspondence between Dad, financial advisors, and a private trustee surfaced. Carefully worded emails about restructuring future distributions. Notes about ensuring stability for the favored beneficiary. My sister's name appeared again and again. Mine barely at all. Step 2 was confirmation. I hired a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. A forensic estate attorney, who specialized in hidden asset transfers and inheritance manipulation. When I slid the documents across her desk, she didn't look shocked. She smiled slowly and said something that made my spine straighten. "He thinks you don't know," she said. "That's his mistake. We subpoenaed nothing. Filed nothing. Not yet." Instead, she helped me build a timeline, every transfer, every reclassification, every quiet reroute of money that legally should have required my consent. Dad had relied on technicalities, assuming no one would ever question him. He'd been sloppy in his confidence. Step 3 was leverage. I reached out to extended family under the guise of reconnecting after the wedding. Casual conversations. Gentle questions. I learned Dad had been boasting, telling uncles and cousins how he was protecting the family legacy, how I was too sensitive and not ready for responsibility. He had planted a narrative long before I realized I was part of one. I documented everything. Dates. Words. Witnesses. Meanwhile, Dad felt untouchable. He threw a lavish anniversary dinner. Sat at the head of the table like a king. Made jokes at my expense again, smaller this time, confident, careless. My sister laughed nervously. He noticed nothing. That was step 4, the trap. My lawyer suggested patience. Let him make the next move. And he did. An email arrived 2 weeks later. Dad wanted me to sign a family agreement, a harmless-looking document, he said, just formalizing what we'd all agreed on. I almost admired the audacity. The document would have legally stripped me of any future claim. Instead of refusing, I replied calmly. "I'd like to review it together," I wrote. "With everyone present." He agreed instantly. That's when I knew he still believed he was in control. What he didn't know was that every lie was documented, every move anticipated, every signature now unnecessary. The stage was set. The evidence was airtight. And soon, the same confidence he'd worn at the wedding, the same arrogance that made him mock me in public, would become the reason he'd fall in front of everyone who mattered. The calm before the storm never felt so loud. The courtroom was packed, but all I could hear was the steady beat of my own heart. Dad sat at the front, perfectly composed, or at least he thought he was. His smug expression from the wedding was back, but this time, it would crumble. The judge called the case, my claim to the family estate, specifically the portions Dad had quietly funneled to my sister. The evidence was undeniable. Emails, bank transfers, trustee notes, all documented, all legally irrefutable. My lawyer presented each piece with surgical precision, laying bare a pattern of favoritism and deception that had been years in the making. When the first slide showed Dad's emails boasting about protecting the favored child's inheritance, a ripple ran through the courtroom. Murmurs, shocked gasps, even my sister's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's eyes narrowed, and he opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had always relied on his charm and intimidation to sway opinion, but charm didn't work here. Truth did. Then came the pièce de résistance, the recorded phone calls. He had bragged, multiple times, about how he handled the estate, without me knowing, about how I was too sensitive to inherit anything significant. The groomsman from the wedding. He testified. The same man who had saluted and forced Dad's humiliation months ago gave a precise, calm account of Dad's manipulations and arrogance. The courtroom collectively held its breath as Dad's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Finally, the judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Harold Thompson, your attempts to conceal and misappropriate assets intended for your heir are clear. Not only do you face restitution, but your management of the estate will be placed under an independent fiduciary until further notice. Red-faced, Dad sputtered, tried to argue, tried to charm, but the evidence was a tidal wave, and every lie he had told, every act of favoritism, was now public. My sister shrank in embarrassment. Friends and relatives whispered in disbelief. The humiliation was complete. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed. Social media exploded. The man who had mocked me, humiliated me in front of everyone, and tried to steal my inheritance had been dismantled, piece by piece, truth by truth. The same arrogance that had driven his betrayal was now his undoing. I stood silently, letting the moment wash over me. I hadn't needed to yell or lash out. I hadn't needed to compromise my integrity. The law, the evidence, and my patience had done it all. Dad's empire was still intact in structure, but his control, his influence, his reputation, destroyed. And in the silence that followed, I realized something profound: victory didn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispered through the truth, elegantly, decisively, and with finality. I turned to my lawyer and whispered, "It's done." She smiled. "And now, you own your place." The storm of betrayal had passed. The reckoning had arrived. And the world had watched it unfold. The courtroom doors closed behind me, and for the first time in years, I felt air that wasn't thick with tension or dread. Dad's empire still stood, yes, but the man himself was shattered. His control, his arrogance, his relentless favoritism, all exposed to the world. Friends, family, colleagues, they all knew the truth now. The man who had mocked me at my sister's wedding, spat his wine, and tried to steal my rightful inheritance had been stripped of every illusion of power. I walked out into the sunlight, feeling a calm that was almost alien. The months of planning, the late nights of gathering proof, and the meticulous patience had paid off. I wasn't just victorious, I was free. Free from his manipulation, free from his mockery, free from the shadow he had cast over my life. Mom tried to apologize, but I realized the apology wasn't necessary. This wasn't about forgiveness, it was about justice. And justice had a way of being louder than any lecture, louder than any insult. My sister approached hesitantly, a mix of shame and relief on her face. She hadn't known the full extent of Dad's scheming, and now, she could finally see that loyalty and honesty mattered more than blind obedience or favoritism. The world had witnessed my patience, my strategy, and my composure. I hadn't retaliated with anger or cruelty. I had let truth and justice do the work. And the poetic irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had humiliated me publicly at the wedding now faced his own public reckoning, one that no amount of charm, wealth, or influence could undo. I stood by the entrance of the courthouse, feeling the weight of every insult, every sneer, every calculated move Dad had made to sideline me. And for the first time, I smiled, not bitterly, not triumphantly, but with clarity. I was stronger, smarter, and no longer afraid of the man who had once loomed so large in my life. To everyone watching this story unfold, have you ever felt powerless, mocked, or betrayed by someone you trusted? I want to hear your story. Leave your comments below, share your experiences, and know that even in the darkest moments, patience and strategy can turn the tide. If you want to see more stories of justice, revenge, and triumph, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Some battles are fought quietly, but the victories echo loudly. And as I walked away from the courthouse, I couldn't help but think. The wine he spat in anger that day wasn't just humiliation, it was a taste of the reckoning he never saw coming. Justice, served cold, always has the final laugh.